asking for $320 billion, up 8% over fiscal 1986. The defense budget represents 32% of the president's total 1987 budget request. Defense officials say the military buildup is paying off.
We are on the road to recovery as a nation, in large part because we are on the road to recovery of our umbrella of security, our armed forces. Our increasing military power is pushing back many of the challenges we face.
The fiscal 1987 budget puts 48% of its spending towards weapon systems and a 19% hike in research and development, most notably the SDI program. Military personnel being increased this year represents 24% of the budget. Operations and maintenance of the military and the Pentagon represent 27% of the budget request. And those requests came under fire today.
Now we've got the same situation as we did in the economy under President Carter. We've got a defense policy of too much money chasing too few goods. We pumped up defense demand, and we got higher prices.
And even North Dakota's Mark Andrews, a self-described hawk, had harsh words for the defense budget.
I think it's obvious the defense budget is ripe for perhaps necessary and long overdue, I hate to suggest it, coining a word, decapitation.
With arms reduction negotiations going on and the second summit near, is this really the time to tie the president's arm behind his back rather than strengthening his hand?
Today's hearing and all the rest of the 1987 budget negotiations are being played against the Graham-Rudman-Hollings backdrop. If Congress and the president fail to agree on deficit reduction targets, the Defense Department's share of across-the-board cuts could be as high as $50 billion. And that's a fate the Department of Defense wants to avoid. In Washington, Bob Friedman for the Nightly Business Report.
While Congress debates the proposed cuts in the president's budget, a challenge to the Graham-Rudman balanced budget law requiring those cuts will be heard in court tomorrow, where a three-judge district court panel will decide its constitutionality. The panel is scheduled to rule tomorrow on two lawsuits challenging the law as a violation of the Constitution's separation of powers doctrine. The challenge was filed by the National Treasury Employees Union and 12 members of Congress.
Well, Martin Feldstein, the president's former chief economic advisor, today told the Senate Finance Committee Americans could see interest rates drop if Congress cuts spending in line with the Graham-Rudman law. President Reagan's current chief economic advisor, Beryl Sprinkle, today predicted the economy will grow at a robust rate this year with only moderate inflation, but that the record trade deficit will not improve soon. Speaking to the Congressional Joint Economic Committee, Sprinkle said he is very confident the gross national product will grow at a healthy 4% rate this year. Committee Chairman David Obey pointed out the administration's poor record on economic forecasts and said if its prediction was off by even 1% this year, it would increase the budget deficit by about $20 billion. Linda?
The trade deficit is under scrutiny from the National Association of Manufacturers, which is holding its annual meeting this week in Boca Raton, Florida. NAM Chairman Robert D. says the President and Congress are not dealing effectively with countries that impose unfair trade barriers against U.S. goods.
Why our government has been loath to deal with this is beyond my imagination. I don't think it should be that hard to do. I think you can identify those countries that are doing this. You can say, in these three areas, you are violating our agreements. You have 6 months to correct this. If you don't, then we will retaliate.
The group has also targeted product liability and the federal deficit as areas of top concern. Dean?
The nation's major retail chains are reporting weak sales for January compared to the levels of the month last year. The largest retailer, Sears Roebuck & Company, says its sales for the period rose less than 1%, while number 2 Kmart reports an overall sales rise of more than 6.5%, but adds that stores open a year ago recorded a sales dip of more than 1.5%. Meanwhile, New York-based JCPenney's sales showed a small gain, but Federated department stores reported a comparatively large decline. Analysts are blaming the somewhat disappointing results on consumers who are spending cautiously because of the increased debt they incurred during the Christmas shopping season. Paul?
Snapping out of a two-day holding pattern, prices on Wall Street broke out on the upside today with the help of merger and stock split news, and for the first time in history, the Dow Industrial Average closed above the 1,600 level with a gain of just over 7.5 points at 1,600.69. Let's check out the record of this record-breaking session. With bullish confidence bolstered by yesterday's resilient performance in the face of considerable selling pressure, stocks moved impressively higher right from the opening bell. Even the depressed oil issues moved higher in reaction to today's Herd on the Street column in the Wall Street Journal, which suggested that many of them should be purchased now. By 11 a.m. then, the industrial average jumped to over a 12.5-point gain, and 880 stocks were up, only 450 down, with volume running 13 million shares ahead of yesterday's pace. Now, since the early rally pushed the Dow several points above the 1,600 level, Some more of those selling programs, which are pre-planned to be triggered by a move through a centenary number, were set off and pushed the market down a bit during mid-session. At 1 p.m., the industrial average backed off to post just a little over a 6.25 point gain, and only 8 stocks were higher for every 6 lower. Mid-afternoon brought a gradual improvement with the banking stocks joining the oils in their rebound, and Chrysler gave Wall Street a psychological boost by announcing a 3-for-2 stock split and a 50% increase in the cash dividend. At 3 p.m., the industrial average pushed back up with nearly a 10-point gain just below the 1603 level, and 9 stocks were higher for every 6 lower. The final hour saw some slight deterioration in prices as traders hesitated prior to the release of the weekly money supply report, but the Dow Industrial Average managed to salvage a closing gain of 7.57, putting it at 1,600.69, thereby surpassing that benchmark level for the first time ever. The high of the day way up at 1616.5, the low down around 1587.5, trading volume 146.1 million shares. The Dow Transport's moving up nicely, nearly a 3.25 point gain. Utilities up almost 1/4, and the Dow 65 gaining 2.61. Standard & Poor's 500, 400, and 100 all nice fractional gains. The SPOC 250 up just over a point. New York Stock Exchange Index up 0.38, Value Line gaining 0.93, and the Wilshire 5000 did hit a new high with that gain of 7.845. Then the Federal Reserve reported on the week ending January 27th, the M1 money supply rose $2.7 billion. I'll be back shortly to show you where the action was in today's market.
On the precious metals markets today, gold rose $1.25 to $338.25 in London, and in later New York trading, gold also rose, climbing $1.40 to $337.40, while silver was down a nickel to $5.85 the ounce. On the New York money markets, the dollar was mostly unchanged today, closing higher against the franc, lower against the Canadian dollar, but unchanged against the mark, yen, and British pound.
About 70 striking workers and their supporters rallied outside the Hormel plant in Austin, Minnesota today, and there were about 25 arrests, including one labor leader. The demonstrators were trying to keep replacement workers from entering the plant and forced police to close the road to the plant for about 5 minutes. Among those arrested was Ray Rogers, a strategist for the local union, who was warned by a judge not to lead any demonstrations which would violate a court order limiting pickets to 3 at the gate. Rogers said the protest was not as large as originally planned, but that it was a success. The protest, however, failed to keep 850 replacement workers from gaining access to the plant.
On another labor front, representatives of Eastern Airlines pilots union and the carrier will resume contract talks next Tuesday in Washington. Both sides eagerly accepted today's invitation from the National Mediation Board to go back to the bargaining table next week, a little more than 2 weeks after talks between the two sides deadlocked in late January.
One of the arguments for stricter border controls in this country is that illegal aliens take jobs away from American citizens. But a new report by the President's Council of Economic Advisors says there's no evidence to support that argument. While not condoning illegal immigration, the Council says illegal aliens are easily absorbed into the labor force and in some cases can make a positive economic contribution. The report says a case in point is farm labor. And while many aliens work illegally on farms, their cheap labor helps keep American growers competitive in world markets.
It's Friday morning, February 7th in the Philippines right now, and some 26 million voters are expected to choose today in a presidential election that could have repercussions for the American presence in the Pacific. For President Marcos, it's the first time in 20 years that his dictatorial powers are being challenged. The challenger is the much-publicized Corazon Aquino, the 47-year-old widow of assassinated Marcos opposition leader Benigno Aquino. During the 3-month violence-ridden campaign, even top Filipino businessmen and church officials have supported charges of corruption aimed at Marcos, while the 68-year-old president has called Mrs. Aquino a communist sympathizer. At stake for the United States is the future of the Subic Naval Base and Clark Air Force Base, bastions of American power in the Pacific. Marcos favors the American presence. Mrs. Aquino has been ambivalent about it. For American business interests in the Philippines, the situation is less critical. There are some 500 U.S. companies doing business there, with a reported total investment of $1.1 billion and dwindling. Longtime observers say if the economic bad times continue in the Philippines, many more American companies will pull out no matter what the cost.
More on international news. Oil prices firmed a bit on world markets today, but many analysts say it's largely a technical response to the sharp downturn in recent weeks. The impact of falling oil prices on Mexico's finances is prompting a series of meetings this week. The governor of Mexico's central bank left for Paris today after talks with his counterpart at the Bank of England. Even before oil prices began their slide, Mexico had said it would need as much as $4 billion in new financing this year. Paul?
Wall Street got all the financing today that it needed to push through the 1,600 level on the Dow for the first time in history. As we review these averages, there we see it, 1,600.69 with that gain of a little over 7.5 points. It was just December 11th that we pushed through 1,500 for the first time. Transport's doing nicely, up nearly 3.25, and fractional gains in all the other indexes you see here. Trading volume today up about 12 million shares from yesterday's pace. Down volume was exceeded by up volume by some 24 million shares. And the advanced decline ratio 9-6 in favor of winners, 236 new highs for the year and a mere 38 new lows. Topping the active list on just over 4 million shares, American Telephone not moving with the market, down 3/8. Then Goodyear Tire and Rubber showing no change. Southwest Airlines dropped 2 3/4 points. The news here is that first of all, the Goldman Sachs brokerage this morning removed it from its buy list, and then later in the day there were rumors that Southwest was going to make a bid for Ozark Holdings. National Semiconductor moving up 3/8. PepsiCo down 2 1/8 points. Analysts at both Merrill Lynch and the First Boston brokerages downgraded their opinion of PepsiCo today. Sears Roebuck rebounding 3/4 after reporting a slight drop in fourth quarter earnings yesterday. IBM edging up just 1/4. Texas Oil and Gas dropping 3/8 and Phillips Petroleum down 1/8. Archer Daniels Midland was off 1 1/8 points. The Donaldson Lufkin brokerage cut its earnings estimate for the company and removed it from its buy list. Among widely held issues, Allied Signal edged up 3/8 even though it reported nearly a $4 loss in its fourth quarter of 85, but that was widely expected. And Allied Signal says earnings for 1986 should be in the range of $3.75 to $4.25. American Can moving up 3 1/4 points. The company has a lot of financial operations and lower interest rates are helping them apparently. Chrysler responding with a 1 5/8 point gain to the news of the 3 for 2 stock split and the 50% boost in the dividend to 25 cents quarterly now. That'll be on the post-split shares. Eli Lilly down 2.5 points. The company reported just slightly higher fourth quarter earnings, 89 versus 82 cents last year. Exxon edging up 5/8 in response to positive comments about it in the Heard on the Street column in the Journal. General Motors down 3/4 point today, and Holiday Corporation down 1.5, although it did report nicely higher fourth quarter earnings, 96 cents versus 59 cents. Foxmeyer, the big point mover of the day, up 5 5/8. The company says it is in talks with an unnamed company about its acquisition. Rumors have it might be Dartcraft. Healthcare USA moving up a full point, but we saw no news to account for that. Southland Corporation rising 1 5/8. It was mentioned favorably in that Heard on the Street column in the Journal today, and also Southland has agreed to sell 50% of its Citgo unit to Venezuela for $300 million. Interregional Financial moving up 1 3/8. No specific news today. It's in the right group, though. Augad Incorporated tumbling 2 5/8. The company reported a 72% drop in fourth quarter earnings. And Dayton Hudson down 3 1/4 points. The company is predicting it'll have flat fourth quarter earnings, a disappointment to the street. Over in the American Exchange, a gain of exactly 2 1/4 points in the market value index. Trading volume up nicely from yesterday's pace, and 3 stocks up for every 2 down. Topping the active list on 663,000 shares, Ozark Holdings up 1 3/8 on those rumors that Southwest Airlines might make a buyout bid. Just rumors. Stone Petroleum down to 16th. Hudson Foods, no change. Key Pharmaceuticals up a half point. Now, the company last week said it may have a loss of up to 27 cents in its fourth quarter and break even for the year, yet the stock's been strong. I hear rumors today that Shearing Plow may be having a look at Key. Just rumors. Astrotech International up 1/8 point. The company has offered to build a new shuttle and then lease it to NASA. Tejon Ranch, look at that one, up 122 points, again riding high on the saddle with that blistering 122-point gain. The company announced yesterday a 10-for-1 split. It has very valuable land in Southern California. Resorts International A stock moving up 3 points. Apparently, the rumors are getting hotter. The company has a buyer for its Atlantic City Hotel and Casino. NASDAQ trading for the 5th session in a row, a new high in the NASDAQ Composite Index with that gain of nearly 2 points. Trading volume up 14 million shares from yesterday's pace, about 11 stocks up for every 8 down. NASDAQ 100 Index up 1.85. Topping the active list, Intel down 1 3/4. That's just what it gained yesterday. The company said its first quarter loss will be about the size of its fourth quarter loss last year. Glaxo Holdings off 1/4. Roadway Services moving up 2 1/2. Jaguar up 1/4. Reebok down 1/4, 5th in volume. Citizens in Southern of Georgia up 5/8. Good Guys up. New issue today. The offering price 14. It moved up 1 1/8 from that point. LSI Logic gained 3/4. Kemper Insurance coming down from about a 6-point gain yesterday. And King World down 1 1/2. It was 10th in volume. Stater Brothers up 1 1/4 on sharply higher first quarter earnings. General Shale moved up 1 1/4 on moderately higher fourth quarter earnings. And Atlantic Research has received a $54 million contract from the LTV Corporation. The bond market was under selling pressure today. First on reports that Japan has no near-term plans to cut its discount rate again. Then came concern that the Gramm-Rudman deficit-cutting law might run into constitutionality problems when a federal court panel makes its decision tomorrow. Finally, the $7 billion auction of 30-year Treasury bonds got only a lukewarm reception today, as they were priced to yield an average 9.28%. Looking at the long-term governments of 2015, a loss of 21/32, no change at all on the American telephone corporates or the corporate bond index. And these Jacksonville revenues down 7/8 of a point at 108.25 bid. Fed funds hovering just under 8% all day long. That's our Wall Street wrap-up, Steve.
Thanks, Paul. As a special presidential panel begins its probe into the space shuttle disaster, NASA has an interesting offer to consider. As Paul mentioned, General Space Corporation, a subsidiary of Astrotech International, says it has offered to buy a new shuttle and lease it back to the space agency. Astrotech Chairman Willard Rockwell says the loss of the Challenger might have triggered the first steps toward private ownership of a space shuttle.
In business notes, Osborne Computer, the company that made the first portable computer, has ceased operations and will apparently be liquidated. But although the firm has been declared in default of the terms of its Chapter 11 reorganization plan, Osborne executives say they're still raising money to try to revive the company. Mazda Motors has confirmed it will give preferential treatment to about 14,000 laid-off Ford workers when it begins hiring employees for its auto assembly plant under construction near Detroit. And shareholders of Lorimar and Telepictures Corporation today approved the merger of those two companies. Dean?
Almost as long as there has been a deficit problem in this country, W.R. Grace & Company has been making a big issue of it. In fact, the company's chairman, J. Peter Grace, headed a presidential commission that made more than 2,700 recommendations to cut government waste. But when it comes to dealing with the three major commercial television networks, or at least their sales departments, Grace's message appears to be falling on deaf ears. As New York correspondent Neil Cavuto reports, the networks have refused to run a Grace commercial, attacking huge deficits. And that has only fueled the controversy around Grace and his message.
I'm afraid you're much too young to understand.
No, this is not the latest movie from Hollywood wonder Steven Spielberg, but a commercial from W.R. Grace & Company. The evil menace here is a federal deficit gone wild. The year is 2017, and an elderly man faces a 12-year-old prosecutor who wants to know whatever went wrong with the American economy.
I have a question. Are you ever going to forgive us?
It might make for good movie making, but the major television networks apparently decided not good commercial making. ABC, NBC, and CBS deemed the ad too controversial and of such a political nature that it was unsuitable to air.
I think the problem is with this particular ad, it's very morbid in appearance from the little bit I've seen of it, and it has a very negative connotation. It is, in effect, putting forth the American current generation on trial for having caused the budget deficit.
But at least NBC and ABC did run an earlier Grace ad in which a newborn baby is presented with a bill for her portion of the national deficit.
You owe the United States government, in round numbers, $50,000.
In fact, the controversy over airing or not airing Grace ads has brought the company some favorable publicity. Even on Wall Street, where the ad has helped deflect attention away from reported takeover rumors hinting that W.R. Grace might be a possible buyout target.
Frankly, we think it is a good PR job. We would rather not have had the PR job and run the ad just in a standard, decent way we intended to do it. We didn't spend $300,000, which we did on this ad, in order not to be able to show it to the American public.
Now, Grace officials, for their part, still remain optimistic that their so-called controversial ad will be played by the three major networks. The three major networks, for their part, say that will not happen, that the ad remains too controversial and, in the long run, too political to ever be played on those networks anytime soon. In New York, Neil Cavuto for the Nightly Business Report.
In an effort to increase trade between the two nations, Britain and the Soviet Union have signed a 5-year economic cooperation agreement. Britain had a $250 million trade deficit with Moscow in 1985, and Soviet leader Gorbachev says he hopes to increase trade between the two countries by 50%. The deal also extends an agreement that dates from 1975 and coincides with Moscow's own latest 5-year economic development plan. Coming up, Dan Lundberg says it's unlikely gasoline prices will ever return to the levels of the early 70s.
The Veterans Administration says it's placing tough restrictions on its mortgage guarantees, including its first-ever loan ceiling. The VA says the moves are tied to expected Graham-Rudman cuts and are intended to enable the agency to continue loan guarantees through fiscal year 1986. The new curbs include halting guarantees for the refinancing of loans, a ban on VA-backed loans for veterans who have received them before, and a $90,000 ceiling on VA guaranteed mortgages.
Well, there's good news from for the housing industry from the National Association of Realtors. The group says for the first time in almost 10 years, a middle-income family earned enough money in December to buy a moderately priced home. The NAR said a family that earns the nation's median income